To discuss sanctions, removing sanctions, the reaction or lack thereof to them from their Russian recipients, we're joined by Mikhail, former United States ambassador to Russia. Michael, thank you for joining us here on TV Rain.
Thanks for having me back.
How do you feel about the United States imposing sanctions on Fridman and Aven despite attempts to somehow soften the blow against them? What do you think of this approach?
Well, I want to be clear. I don't know the details of why they have been sanctioned. Obviously, these are two very prominent Russian businessmen who have lived abroad for many years. And the fact that they are sanctioned now and not a year and a half ago suggests to me that the U.S. government obtained new information that made them change their mind, because I think it's very striking that they were not sanctioned many months ago or even a year ago. As you know, there was a major study by the magazine Projekt that talked about the oligarchs that are funding Putin's war. And both Mr. Aven and Mr. Fridman were in that story. And just a few days later, they were sanctioned. So I can't claim that there's a causal relationship there. I can't claim, because I don't know the facts. But the report in Projekt got a lot of attention here in the United States because it detailed, and as they always do, with lots of data, with lots of information, how many Russian oligarchs, many Russian businessmen were directly and indirectly supporting Putin's war, Putin's barbaric, horrible war. And I just wonder if maybe it was the information in that report that was the new trigger for why they got on the sanctions list. But I want to be 100% crystal clear. I have no knowledge of that in particular. That's just my speculation.
I'll remind our viewers that Mikhail forms part of the Yermak-McFaul Expert Group, Yermak being head of the presidential office of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, which is engaged in sanctions politics, and McFaul advises and consults on the subject. Could it be said that a system has been established to find a way out of being sanctioned? Because we are witnessing essentially the first ever case, namely Tinkoff, although in this case there are British sanctions, but nevertheless the sanctions against him were lifted. Does this mean that there is a specific path being formed for Russian businessmen and oligarchs to be freed from sanctions?
Yes, I think that's right. And Mr. Tinkoff is not the only one, by the way, that I know of. Others have done that. And I think it suggests that there are ways to prove to those countries that are implementing sanctions that they should be lifted. And I think Mr. Fridman and Mr. Aven have options if they choose to go that way. My own view is that business people in Russia today who have active business in Russia today, not those that emigrated and have no business inside, have a very clear option. They can privatize their investments. They can cash out of Russia. They can denounce the war. And I believe they should also then make a major financial contribution to Ukrainian reconstruction and not wait for the US government or the British government or the EU to tell them to do so, but do it out of morality. Do it because it's the right thing to do. And if your company was providing technology or finances to Putin, you have an obligation to stop that if you actually believe the war is wrong. And I know lots of these people. I want to be clear. Everybody is a tough guy when they're talking to me privately. Everybody talks in very moralistic terms about how awful this war is privately. But that's not enough. You need to take actions to stop funding Putin's war and to stop providing technology for Putin's war machine. Those are the two most important components for the Biden administration. I can tell you that with great certainty. They are trying to stop funding and they are trying to stop the flow of technology to the military-industrial complex. So if you do those two things and denounce the war, I think you have a chance of getting off the sanctions list now.
Why do you think neither Fridman nor Aven didn't speak out publicly? Even I have no doubt that they form part of the group you were talking about, those who clearly and strongly condemn the Russian invasion. I am not asking you to confirm or deny this, I'm just guessing. But why do you think they have not made direct statements in the same way as someone like Arkady Volozh, the founder of Yandex?
Well, first, I want to praise Arkady Volozh for what he did do. Obviously, I would have liked to have seen the statement months and a year and a half ago, but this is exactly the kind of statement that others need to follow in his footsteps. I also think it's a horrible tragedy what is now happening to Yandex. I know Yandex. When I used to work in Russia, I visited Yandex. It was a fantastic company. It proved to the world that Russians can invent companies from scratch and compete with one of the most successful companies in the world, Google. That was a tremendous achievement that all Russians should be proud of. They should consider this a great national achievement, a patriotic achievement that is now being ruined by Vladimir Putin. I think that's really important for people to understand that when the government nationalizes companies or hands these companies over to their cronies of the Kremlin, that will lead to economic disaster inside Russia. In fact, we know what that is. That's called the Soviet Union. You don't have to even invent it in your head. We know what that is. That's called the Soviet Union. And what is happening now is one of the most successful, innovative Russian companies ever, Yandex, is going to be destroyed by the Russian state. So I want to first applaud Arkady for doing what he did. Second, to those, I don't know Mr. Aven and Mr. Fridman's thinking. You should ask them for their personal views. But if I had to explain, not excuse, those are two different things. I think what I hear from others are two things. One, they may live abroad, people live abroad, they diversify their portfolio, but they still have assets back in Russia. That creates leverage for Mr. Putin. And my view is you want to get out of those assets so he doesn't have that kind of leverage. And second, and again, I'm saying generally, вообще, I'm not saying about Fridman and Aven because I don't know their particular thinking. But second, of course, Putin uses leverage over family members, over parents. And by the way, this is not just with oligarchs, it's with journalists living abroad, it's with NGO activists living abroad. That's the kind of way he can threaten them. And that's the kind of way that he can coerce people into silence.
Do you think there will be other cases of oligarchs who will have sanctions lifted against them? And what do they make of this in Kiev?
Well, I think there should be a mechanism for people to get off of the sanctions list. That's my personal view. That is not the view of our working group. I'll get to that in a minute. Because sanctions are supposed to change the behavior of individuals and states. So if you change your behavior, then you should be lifted from the sanctions. One of our papers that we wrote many, many months ago in the Yermak-McFaul Working Group, we identified positions, not individuals, to sanction. So that if you are a member of the leadership team at Sberbank, for instance, or you're on the board of Sberbank, we think all of those people should be sanctioned. And I think it's wrong that they're not. Yes, the head of the bank is, and one more person, German Gref is, but why aren't all the other leaders of that bank on the sanctions? And the board that governs Sberbank, every single person on that board, in my view, should be sanctioned. They're part of the problem. But if you withdraw from the board, if you withdraw from the company, then I think that is a mechanism to allow you to get off sanctions. I feel the same way, for instance, about membership in the political party, United Russia. In my view, if every member of United Russia should be sanctioned. They are part of the problem. They are supporting Putin's war. And they should not be allowed to travel in free countries that they denounce publicly as being the enemy. But if you withdraw your membership from United Russia, then that should change your position vis-a-vis sanctions. With respect to others in Kiev, I would say there's a lot of skepticism about allowing people to get off the sanctions list for the simple fact, and it is a fact, that there are so much economic dependencies and intertwined relationships between the Russian economy and many of these people. So my colleagues in Kiev are quite skeptical that just because you denounce the war, that you're still not indirectly supporting it. Now, I think there's a solution to that: more transparency, more information, and in particular, we need to monitor much more closely the flow of technology to the Russian military-industrial complex, and we need to cut that off.
One final question that I didn't prepare beforehand, but as we were filming news, it came out that the NATO Chief of Staff, someone appointed to represent the North Atlantic Alliance, admitted that Ukraine may be able to become a member of the alliance by ceding territory to Russia. Alongside this admission, there has been a number of people in the press suggesting that it's time to sit down at the negotiation table, that Kiev and Moscow must come to an agreement, and that Kiev would have to give something up. How would you analyze this situation, Mikhail?
No, I don't want to comment, because I think it's wrong for an American or a European to negotiate on the behalf of President Zelensky. He's the elected leader of Ukraine. It's for him to decide those kinds of questions. And I think it's arrogant and imperial for outsiders to make those kinds of suggestions on his behalf. Secondly, I've negotiated with Vladimir Putin. I've negotiated with the Kremlin over really difficult negotiations, including about getting rid of nuclear weapons. And one thing I can tell you with certainty, if you give them something, they'll pocket it now rather than later. And so maybe President Zelensky someday will have to make a decision about those kinds of trades. I hope not, but maybe he will. But that should be the very, very last thing that happens, not in the beginning of a negotiation. That's just bad negotiating strategy to throw out those kinds of ideas. So I would urge all of my friends in the West, living in freedom, living in peace, to not negotiate on behalf of the Ukrainians. You're undermining their sovereignty, and you're undermining their leverage in the negotiations should they occur.
As far as I can tell, these whispers are connected to the protracted counteroffensive. I'm not passing judgment on this, just passing on what I've read in the Western press regarding disappointment in what have thus far been modest results. Do you feel this disappointment? Have you been seeing calls to Ukraine to give up something to Russia?
Yeah, in terms of explanation, I think you're exactly right. That's what's happening. People are saying too many people are dying. It's time to trade land for peace. And I don't associate myself with that for a couple of reasons. One, I already said, it's for a decision for Ukrainians, not Americans or Europeans. We should not be negotiating over the heads of the Ukrainians with Vladimir Putin. Americans have talked about these ideas. I just don't want to be a part of that. But second, I know a little bit. I'm not a general, but I know a little bit about history. And I don't understand why everybody keeps talking about the counteroffensive, as if there's only going to be one counteroffensive. First of all, we already had counteroffensive last fall. This is not the first one. This is the second round of them. And I don't understand why we should anticipate that this will be the last one. Why shouldn't we anticipate that there won't be another one, this time with Abrams tanks, this time with F-16s, this time maybe even with long-range missile systems, ATACMS. So when I talk to Ukrainian officials, they say to me, please be patient. Wars don't end with one offensive or not. They sometimes have to go on for a long time. And the determination of when the war ends will be made by leaders in Kiev and leaders in Moscow, not by professors sitting in California.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was Stanford University professor, former United States ambassador to Russia, and representative of the Yermak-McFaul Expert Group dealing with sanctions politics, Mikhail McFaul, who was always welcome here on TV Rain.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times.
We had to leave, forced out of the country by new repressive laws after the first week of the war. Our freedom crushed by the authorities.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We survived, started working from Europe, and now we are watched by millions of people every day.
There's no other independent news channel in Russian. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia in English as well.
So that you could get news about Russia, the war in Ukraine, and Russian society directly from the source.
We want to tell you firsthand what is really happening in Russia. Subscribe to TV Rain Newsroom on YouTube, and let's take a look at our future together.